wonder if that could get copyright striked. Like, is it possible to beatbox something that's accidentally beatbox something that's copywritten? It's a good question. Hello. Hi guys. As usual, I hope you can hear me. Probably can't see me, but should be able to hear me. All right. Let's switch this to. Hello. Hi. What's up, guys? Welcome to yet another stream. This time we are talking about animating with computers. And the main idea here is we're going to discuss how animation has evolved over time from how it used to be a 2D thing. And now we're doing it with computers, and a few interesting things have come into play because of this. And that's what we're going to talk about. The main thing about this session and this video in this video is to discuss, just to give a general background and a bit of a general understanding of how animating with computers is going to work. And whether you've done it before or you're just getting into it, I think some of the things I'm going to talk about here are really important to keep in mind as you progress, either as you learn other tutorials or as we just keep going with these streams. So yeah, this is some important stuff-ish, but I'll definitely make a point of highlighting what the main takeaway has to be out of all of this, because there's gonna be quite a bit of stuff. Great, thank you for the guy shouting out in chat. Thanks for coming through. Thanks for all the guys who've been coming for the stream so far, and thank you for everyone who's been watching after the fact. I think just consuming this information, I hope it's very helpful to all of you, and let's just keep going, and let's see where this goes. Or rather, let's just see where this goes. So if you guys have any questions, as usual, post them in the chat, and I'll pass through them at certain intervals, and then we can just keep going. So just to shout out, what kind of crowd do we have here? Are we talking 2D animators, 3D animators, motion graphics guys, no animation whatsoever? What's you guys' experience like? So I can make some references to those different things. Drop it in the chat. I'll check it out when it becomes relevant. Because I keep forgetting there's a lag. I'm like, oh my god, no one's replying. But then I remember there's a bit of a lag. So yeah, it's ready. Cool, motion graphics and 3D. Yogi animates emoji. Jotham does motion graphics. All right, hey guys, thanks for coming through. Cool. Okay, so general audience, but it looks like motion graphics is the main idea here. I also have some stuff mainly about 3D and movies and such, so I'll also just keep in mind that you guys are mostly MoGraph here. So okay, so let's get started with me switching this to present and then clicking over here. So here we're talking about creating frames, and we're going to talk a lot about frames, and we're going to talk a lot about frames. And here we're just talking about the box that has the artwork inside, the frame that has the image inside. It can be 2D, it can be stop motion, it can be a 3D render, it can be live action, it can be literally anything. But what we're talking about when we say the frame is just what's inside it and what's happening inside. So a lot of the things we can say, like how the character is posing or how the character looks or how the text comes in and all those things, everything is just sort of interoperable to all different styles of animation. So take everything in sort of like I said, this is just a foundation thing. It's supposed to help you build towards all those other things. So keep in mind it just applies to generally everything. Motion designs is also emoji. So let me disappear into the corner. Picture in picture. And I hope you guys can see that. Yes, you can. The screen is on the other side. There we go. Okay, so working with computers. This is the general gist of what we're doing here. We've gone from animating as 2D artists on paper, and now it's become just one guy and his computer, and it's on you to grind and work with the comp itself and figure out how you can get your frames created. So yeah, as I've mentioned already, this is an animation workflow mentality. It's going to apply to just animation in general, and it may as well apply to, no, it applies to animation in general and how we interact with the computer as we create our animations. Because this is not so much just single frame by frame stuff, it's also about what's happening in between those frames. Um, so, how are animations made? What is animation? What are we watching when we're watching an animation? Here's an interesting. Oh man, did I get that? Yes. Here's the an interesting little animation of a goat, and it was found on this vase, like from God knows when, and it has, yeah, it's basically, if you spin the vase around, you can see that this strip here on the side is what's been applied on the vase, and if you spin it around, you basically get this gif up here. So whoever originally designed this hundreds of years ago probably has no idea that gifs exist or what a gif is, but yeah, their work got turned into perhaps what might be the earliest gif, technically speaking, in terms of frames, I guess. So yeah, it was just a good jumping, and this kind of showed what guys had figured out from way back when. It's that animation and live action and things that happen in real life are just one moment to the other. It's the goat is on the ground and then it jumps. And interestingly enough, you can see down here, it's even like anticipating. They already knew about these kind of ideas way back when. So, yeah, everyone just understood it was a moment from one moment to the next, and our brains would essentially fill in the gaps. The tail doesn't have to be in every frame, but as far as we go, we can still understand it's a goat in a forest, and it's just jumping. Um, yeah, so let's go to the next one. And you'll see that a lot of different artists, as time went by in Europe, in France, in England, they started to invent, even in America, what am I saying? They started to invent all these different ideas that are pretty much the same thing. It's just frames put around a circle, and spin the circle fast enough and you get an animation. There was handheld stuff, there was these that you could go to the carnival and see. There was some you'd go to the museum and see. There was some, it was like a movie, you'd go and watch just a loop of a guy yawning. And to them, it was pretty amazing, I guess, for the time. This stuff, I mean, it still is freaking amazing. As a kid, we also had one of those where you spin a fan, and then there's like a little kid jumping on the back or something. I remember those things. They've been there. So the novelty and the gain we get out of it, of just watching something happening, is pretty cool. I like the fun stuff here because, spoiler alert. So I like this one at the bottom here, which is just a pattern. So as it spins around, it has a nice kaleidoscopic effect, and it's probably looks pretty cool. Even this one with the dots, I'd like to see it in real life. So yes, Kaza got it. Essentially, the idea that they're taking advantage of here is persistence of vision, which is everything we look at, even our screens, our phones, cameras, everything basically works with the idea of persistence of vision. So You see one frame, as the next frame comes on screen, you still have some. It's not really burnt into your vision, but like your brain is still processing what it previously saw, and can mash all these things together into a single image. So once we realized that if you can flip two images together, uh, no, maybe you're just a genius. It's all right. So yeah, persistence of vision is just something that came up. There's also that one that's like a coin, and like on one side it's someone seated, and on the other side they're standing. And then like flip it on a when you flip it with a string, it looks like they're just jumping. And it's the same thing, persistence of vision. So you guys know the pencil trick? You know this creepy thing that people do with pens, and then it looks like it's jelly. Yeah, that's also kind of a part of persistence of vision. Your brain kind of trying to analyze and figure out what's happening on the pen, and I don't know. It's just among those things and illusions. Kind of take advantage of persistent of vision as well. There's also a really cool illusion I saw the other day of where it's gray balls with stripes, and then the balls look like they're blue and yellow, just because the stripes are different colors. It's nuts. Um, so yeah, we get stuff like this where you just have these objects that spin around and show as it goes along. It kind of shows an animation. You can see on this one up here that it's kind of spinning. The animation itself is also spinning. So that was something they also came to realize, that if you get the speed of the spin right, and if you get the speed of the spin right, you can get that just right refresh rate that the human eye starts to just see it like the guys dancing over there. Another thing that helped is also a flashing light. Putting in a flashing light that flashes only when the image is passing in front of the viewer. Probably what the horse is doing down here is what would cause it is what would reduce this sort of drifting. But yeah, generally speaking, they got this stuff down, and they explored it, had fun with it. Hey guys, you have your wedding party and you're sending over the invites as this fancy spinning thing. I don't know. Idea right there. Send me royalties. So we also started to see these more, not really people trying to do animation, but also showing further understanding of how things happen from one moment to the other. As you can see with the guys wrestling on that far diagram over there, you can kind of see what's happening from one moment to the next. You can see, wait, doesn't this have a pointer? Oh, it doesn't. And then I spoiled. Today's episode is full of spoilers. So there's these guys here. You can kind of figure out like what's happening from one moment to the next, based on what happened before it. You can tell that this guy just got snatched up, and then now he's being picked up, and some backflip stuff happens. Like you can tell there's a flow of what's going on, and it's not really it's to some extent the artist, the kind of capturing just the right frames, but also on the other side of it, it's us as the viewer. Our brains are filling in the gaps. So you can see on the flip card over there, where is it? On the flip card over here, you can see that it's just, if you flip now all these poses, if you flip them through on a card or something, you can see an animation of sorts play out. And that's what the idea is here, poses. And you can see here they have just a whole bunch of poses. We go back to this guys here, and all of these are just essentially, as much as they're frames, they're also poses, when we start talking about 3D animation. All right, so what if we took that circular thing and just basically extended it and turned it into a line as opposed to a circle? What happens now? Well, this now gives us the ability to show films, to now have something that's linear, something that has a beginning and an ending, and perhaps we can also tell stories. And this is essentially where the idea of a film camera and a projector come from. It's just the same thing of passing a film in front of a light fast enough to produce an image and let your brain fill in the gaps. And I'm sure there's a lot of smart guys in the audience, it seems. So I guess we can say that persistence of vision happens, yes, but also the way it works in reverse. It can be done for a camera and it can be done for a projector. And as I was saying, yeah, for the smart guys in the audience, I'm sure you know the frame rate of film is 24 frames per second. So they found out that this is both the most optimal for someone to watch, but also the lowest, so that they can also use the minimum amount of film. And just over time, that 24 FPS kind of just stuck and give it that film look. All right, so yeah, a typical movie has 90 minutes, which is 5,400 seconds, which is 129, 500,000 frames. Woo! That's a lot of frames, guys. That's a lot of frames. And all those frames have to be drawn or shot or created. They also have to be thought about and figured out and planned. And that's where all these stuff had to go through, all these characters that we know and love. Can you find your favorite character here? Anyone? Well, I have a drink, maybe. Yeah, from this small idea, eventually, here we are hundreds of years later, and they've spawned these cartoons we've all come to know and love. And even the stuff us guys are going to create in the future are all going to be based on all those ideas. So it would be really good to at least get acquainted with them and understand what's going on. And just also think about all the thousands and hundreds of artists of different ages and from different times who have just gone through the process of the process of figuring out animations and how their workflow is gonna be, and strikes and happiness and depression after the show is over. All this stuff has happened on all these different shows, and before we could even get there, we first had to figure out exactly how animation is going to work. And one interesting thing that comes from that is that now that we're working with computers, things have changed. So let's think about this animation from Richard Williams' book, Animator Survival Kit. And he basically explains how to do keyframes, breakdowns, in-betweens, and all that. And there's actually a video of this also on YouTube you can check out. And he shows how the first thing you do is do the keyframes, and then you have your assistant who comes in and does you do the keyframes, and then you do your in-betweens, which is the first two stages. You can see this stage here is the keyframes, and then this stage here is the breakdowns. So in terms of like a motion graphics thing, let's say the top would be the like the storyboards, so to speak. Like you have your layout that's done inside After Effects, and then now this next stage would be, now you have the text animated and things fading in and fading out. And so for them, the workflow would be that the keyframes would be done by one person, the in-betweens would be done by someone else. Okay, in this one, he also discusses in his book how the workflow used to be, and some of the issues they used to face when you have to give your work to someone else for them to fill it in for you. So he explains how instead of doing breakdowns on you want to have space to do breakdowns on threes, so that there is one keyframe in between, so that if your artist is not getting what you're asking of them, you have that space in between to just draw your own keyframe, and then they can draw the in-betweens on either side. Because keep in mind, as much as he's the boss and the big guy, he's drawing the keyframes and the in-betweens, he's probably not drawing all 50 or 60 frames that are going into the 10-second shot he's doing. He's not doing all 300 frames that are going into a 10-second shot. He's just going to do the keyframes and some of the important bits, like up until this point. And then from then onwards, someone's gonna come in and now literally actually draw all these frames in between. So he'd talk about how basically they'd struggle with trying to teach people how to understand this stuff. This is how principles of animation came about. They started telling them, this squash and stretch, this anticipation, this exaggeration. Just by using those terms is how now the 12 principles came about. But all that just came from actually a problem of how do we communicate these ideas of I want this character to walk this way, but I don't want to have to draw all this stuff by myself. We have like 200 artists. We may as well have them sit down and grind and animate. And we need to find a way to do that. And this was the idea. So you draw your 2 keyframes. We have a character stand up and we have the character sit down. Back in those days, this would be easy. You have your in-betweener. You basically send them this and tell them, hey, bruh, this is basically done. It's like 12 frames, just fill in the gaps of the guy sitting down. And he can probably go ahead and just add in these 2 frames and decide that's pretty good, and then give it to his assistant, who's now going to fill in all the gaps to make it a full-on animation. And there's a few things that happened here is that aside from just the guy just straight up going and sitting down, you can see they filled in the character leaning over, shifting their weight, anticipating with their hands to grab the chair, and they've grabbed the chair before they've sat down, and then they straighten up. So the in-betweener has gone ahead and done all that for themselves. They have, it's another human. They have the skill and the knowledge to be able to know that this is an animation of someone sitting down, and this is what needs to happen. This is how their body needs to move. Okay, so then you can have someone else fill in the gaps. Check out Animator Survival Kit, page 55. There's a very interesting conversation he has about how he was trying to figure out how to work with assistants. And this is an example of some of the mistakes he'd get. He'd draw this and this, and someone would draw this, which is just a straight line, and you'd be like, come on, man, like seriously. You just need to make it go like an arc. It's a line and it's a circle. Like, you need to figure that out. But that's just because they were working with interns. They still hadn't really understood how to whip these guys into shape and help them spot all these issues and such. Here are some of the big shots that we had back in those days. And as you remember, we've talked about how these guys weren't actually doing every single frame. They were just doing the keyframes. As you can see over here, we have some assistants and such grinding and doing all those in-betweens. But the bosses and the guys we really know, Akina Walt and them. Okay, Walt didn't do too much animating later on. But all these guys were doing the keyframes. And then the assistants would do all the filling in afterwards. So here's the basic workflow that you'd get. You as, I guess, us guys as the animators now are gonna be the bosses. We're gonna look at ourselves as the boss at the top of the tree there. And we create the main frames. We say, I want the character here, and then he's going to sit down and maybe add one frame in between to say, to add some detail, like I want him to touch his hair in the process of doing it. And then you'd have 2 or 3 assistants come in and fill in the gaps. It would be up to you to figure out how the work is distributed and so on and such. Which sounds pretty straightforward, and you can already understand that these 3 guys down here need to be pretty well trained for them to be able to take your work and be able to fill it in effectively without you having to sumbuanai them. And the best part is they're human, so you can teach them. And which is the point I'm alluding to, is that now we're going to be replacing these guys. What about with computers? We're going to be replacing those guys at the bottom of the tree with a computer. As you recall, we're talking about frames as in individual frames. So we're talking about when you create keyframes all that stuff that's happening in between is now the job the computer is taking over. A job that used to be a human that would do, but now it's a computer. So something interesting has come from this. Comps are very recent. I recall Windows was still a command prompt like in my childhood, so I think it's still pretty new. Computers themselves are still pretty new. The way they work is still pretty new. We're still working through Moore's law and such. They're advancing really, really fast. Whereas animation itself has already been kind of figured out in 2D. So what's happening here? We're now the person at the top of the tree, and we now have one single computer, not necessarily two, because it's not rendering. It's now creating the frames. We now have the computer that's filling in the gaps for you, and the diagram should actually look something like this. It's not really you sitting at the top and feeling fresh and the computer does everything. It's more like you sit alongside it and slightly above it, and it also see the green arrow over there. It also teaches you a few things, because unlike the humans, we now have to consider that comps now don't have the same properties as as people do. It's not as easy. But they also do have some really cool features that come with them as opposed to, say, a human artist. So the pros would be instant results. As soon as I make a change, as soon as I add a breakdown or anything, as soon as you add detail or you add keyframes, you get your results there and then. You just move the time and you can see what happens to the keyframes in between. You don't have to render, or you don't have to send it to someone else and wait for them to fill in the gaps and then it comes back. The other advantage is there's lots of tools and approaches. If someone needs to touch their head, you could do it with FK and rotate the arms, or you could use IK and just set the target and let the comp figure out for you where the elbow should be. You could use shape keys, you could sculpt, you could use sculpt mode and just move the arm onto someone's head, and you still get the same result. So there's all sorts of different tools and approaches to doing the same thing, and a computer does everything at once. Before, we were looking at animators doing outlines, and then the assistants would fill in those outlines, and then once those are approved is when they'd go and get colored, and then they go get photographed, and then only after that would you get to see your final frames. But now, well, I guess even with stop motion, the same thing applies. All those things are done at the same time. It all just boom. Once you set your keyframe on this side, you set your keyframe on the other side. All of the lighting and all the figuring out of those things are done for you at once. Well, at least as an animator, unless you're the guy who had to rig it or something. Then it's another story. Computer cons, they need a lot of intervention to get things right. You have to keep coming in between in parts of the workflow to make sure the comp is giving you the frames that you want. And you learn it. You can't teach it, not necessarily. There's an asterisk there because, well, you can't teach it in a sense. You can create your own plugins. You can create your own scripts and such. But at the end of the day, you're still learning it. You had to learn to code to script anyway. So you learn it as opposed to you teaching it that from now on, when I do an arm like this, I want it to unfold a certain way. A comp can't figure that out for you. You just have to learn how to tell it that that's how you want things to happen from now on. There's lots of tools out there, guys. Motion tracking and cycling, and you can flip poses, and you can do motion capture, and you can use mocap to correct mocap. Like, there's all sorts of crazy things comps can do now, and they've opened up all sorts of possibilities for us, just by being based on a computer. It's giving us more tools to work with and more opportunities, which means it becomes a lot easier to do tedious things. And keep in mind, this is just now from the few 50, 60 years we've had computers. um, we've come up with all these sorts of things, and things are still changing. If you look at all the stuff that's coming up, we have motion capture, which is recent. It's not like, is it even 10 years old? It's maybe 15 years old. Like, it's very, very recent. We have real-time renderers that are coming. We have photo scanning. We have GPU plus CPU rendering, which is the stuff. And we have neural networks as well, which are now coming in to do a lot of human-based tasks. And I've seen, like, there's an app that does um, physics for you. So you can put a character standing as one keyframe and put him on the ground on the next keyframe, and it kind of just does put a breakdown of him like upside down, and the AI will now show you how he should go if he's going to do that kind of maneuver. It's really crazy. And it's just a beta, and it's like just one guy doing it, which is pretty cool. Yes, Cascador, that's the one. um Cascador does that. It's really dope. Check it out if you can. So yeah, and that's just like neural networks, and even neural networks themselves are just a few years old. We don't know what they're doing, and they've slowly started getting into apps. Like Photoshop now has it for content aware fill and scale and such things. Will now use neural networks to fill in the gaps. And again, this is just the beginning. Like, now the tools are going to build on top of that, are going to now continue changing how work is done, how stuff is made. And that's what really is what we're asking ourselves now. Now that we have stuff like 12 principles of animation that was being applied back then into 2D stuff. Now as we move into 3D, what happens to those things? Check out these wacky guys in dots. Man, they're gonna. I wonder if this is gonna look silly, like, like even maybe like 20 years from now, like these outfits and stuff are gonna be ridiculous because things are just moving so quick, and even us as we're getting older, it'll be harder for us to keep up. So we need to consider how all this new technology and stuff is going to affect terms and techniques. Now that we have mocap, what if we have an app like Cascador and mocap combined? And now you don't even have to create keyframes anymore. So what are you doing worrying about exaggeration and squash and stretch and such? Now those become terms that you're using as ways to inform the AI, or maybe as you guys to just communicate. But strictly speaking, there won't be a squash and stretch setting inside there or anything. It's probably going to evolve into something else. So the real question is, what's that stuff going to be, and how can we keep up? We can't. And the older we get, the harder it's gonna be. But it's always good to try and just follow what's going on, and try and consider that animation itself is it's still growing. It's still in its infancy stage. Now they finally figured out how to do photorealistic renders. Toy Story 4, they started experimenting with lenses and such things. So let's see where that's going to go. There are now games that are using claymation as the render style, which is pretty lit. Um, these stuff, yeah, things are just evolving, and as more time goes by, I think our techniques and the terminologies and the stuff we use are also going to change a lot. So we're still using old methods, guys. Even right now, our methods of blocking, spline, all those things are just based on 2D ideas, on stuff for if you've done 3D characters, that is. The workflow of blocking and all those are just tied to 2D things. So eventually, as time goes by and mocap and all these things, and even animation itself, as the techniques improve over time, we're going to start seeing new methods come up, and these are going to just become old, which is pretty interesting. I'm looking forward to that. So let's take a look at one example of what it meant when we were going from a computer to when we were going from people to computers. What did it mean, and what are some of the consequences of how we're working? So here's example one of hammer and nail. So here we are, me as an artist. I have this scene I need to create. It's based on actually a scene in Animator Survival Kit, and the idea is it's talking about doing a hammer, and you have a nail, and you this is the idea that you have when you come and sit down in front of the comp. You've modeled the block, you've modeled the nail, you've put the deformer inside it, and then you have the hammer up there, and now you just want to get an animation of it coming down and striking the nail. um you guys are awful smart, though. You probably already know where I'm going with this, but let's just go with it. And yeah, so we're gonna start by creating two keyframes. The first keyframe is going to be this one here, which is going to be of the hammer up there and the nail. And then the second keyframe is going to be of the hammer hitting the nail. So even when you start out in animation, this is probably the first mistake you're going to make, and you're gonna be like, what? And like slap yourself in the head and be like, yeah, okay, it kind of makes sense. So keyframe in 2D is considered an important moment. It's like a pause in the animation. It's essentially important to the story. If you recall the animation I showed of the guy going up to the blackboard, the keyframes were just him standing, him bending over to pick up the chalk, and him standing with the chalk on the board. Those three were the keyframes. So yeah, key as in they were important. They were key to the story to that they were trying to tell with that scene, with that shot. So keyframe came from 2D as that's what it meant. So for us, we have two keyframes in terms of the story we're telling here. We have the hammer and the nail that's establishing it, and the other keyframe is the hammer has hit the nail. And I think that's sufficient enough for you guys to understand the story I'm trying to tell here, right? Right? You guys can still hear me, right? Let's see. I think you can. Okay. Let's see. Okay, there's a couple of questions. Looks like a long question. I'll get to it a bit later. But I hope you guys are still there. Yes. Okay, cool. So yes, we have these two. You can understand the story I'm telling here. It was the tragic story of a nail that got hit by a hammer, a blue hammer. So when we've now come down, we've come down and we're now sitting in front of the computer and we're like, that's done. We need to consider that when you come into a computer, it's not the same thing anymore. We're now talking about a keyframe being a user-defined value in time. It's not this storytelling thing. It's, as a concept, it can be a storytelling thing, but as far as the computer is concerned, a keyframe is just a user-defined value in time. So here we are. Oops. Wait, which side is it? Yes. So here we are. We've made these two keyframes here. The first one is this, just with the hammer there, and I've clicked on the stopwatch or the record button, or pressed I or pressed S, whatever software you're using, to set the keyframes, and then push the time forward, moved the hammer down, bent the nail, and pressed the stopwatch again, and that's now created the keyframe. So I'm like, all right, so comp is out. There's the keyframe for the nail bending, and there's the keyframes for the hammer position. So I hope you guys understand what I meant by the computer now is going to fill in the frames. Technically speaking, us as the user, we've created those two frames. We've set that the nail has to be here like this, and the hammer has to be like this. We've not created what's in between as the hammer is coming down or as the nail is bending. We've not done any of that. And that's now what the computer is going to do. So we've now created these two keyframes. Hammer position is 200. It's coming down. It's also rotating a bit, but we don't need to worry about the rotation so much. Let's just look at the position. So what's computer going to do? it's going to do what it does best, keyframe interpolation. It's just going to fill in the gaps between the keyframes by connecting the two dots. Computers just know math, so the best thing they can do is create graphs. Or as opposed to creating graphs, it can just do the interpolation and fill in the gaps. And well, yeah, I'd like to say it's not just going to be a straight line. Sometimes, like in Blender, the default is Bezier curves. In After Effects, they're usually linear. You have to press F9 to get curves like this. But yeah, most of the time, most softwares are going to default to a curve like this. And then on the nail bend, it's a deformer, so it's going to go from 0 to 100, and it's going to bend the nail just like that with the same sort of curve, starting slow, going faster, and then slowing down as it reaches the end. So we can kind of already see where the problem lies. Right there in the middle, where the two cross each other, you can tell that before the hammer gets to where it needs to be, anyway, so a computer is going to go in and create in-betweens, and we're going to call them computer in-betweens, and that's going to be all those frames the comp is going to create between the two keyframes that we've made. And when we take a look at what's happening at this frame it's made in the middle, you'll see that exact problem where the position and the bend are crossing each other. You start to realize that, basically the nail is bending before the hammer gets there. And that's weird. Computer, what the hell? And, if this was a human, they would have definitely just been like, okay, there's no way this nail is just bending before. And they'd be able to fill in the gaps. But with a computer, it's just going to do what you tell it. You just told it bend the nail and move the hammer. You didn't tell it about physics. It's not some AI stuff. It's just gonna fill in the gaps. So it's up to us to now create a new frame ourselves. Yeah, let's see what I did there. Create a new frame ourselves where we tell it that when the hammer gets to this position, only then can the nail start bending. So we've done two things here. We've told it the position of the hammer and the bend of the nail. We've told it basically to, by creating a new keyframe there, we've basically told it to maintain the nail bend to stay in one line until the hammer gets there. And then just as the hammer touches it, that's when it's going to start bending. And that's basically what this graph is. And there's an interesting implication to that. It's that just to explain that we needed the nail to only bend when the hammer touches it, it means that now we've had to define both the hammer's position and the nail's position at that specific time, just to be able to create that one frame. And now if we go back to that specific time in the middle, remember we weren't just looking at where the hammer was touching the nail. We were looking at the frames that the computer is creating. So if we now go back to that frame, you can see the hammer is where it's supposed to be, and now the nail is not bent anymore. So essentially, by creating a new frame at the after the fact, somewhere huko mwisho, we were able to fix an issue that was happening in the middle. We didn't have to create the keyframe in the actual middle where the problem was. So again, it's an issue of it's an issue of just how the computer fills in the gaps. So you don't necessarily have to put the frame in the middle. You just have to add more keyframes. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. It does. You guys are still following? Because I think it might be a bit complicated. But yeah, anyway, yeah, there was some guys here who are ahead of me, so I don't think I should really worry about it. So example 2, if you guys have any questions, now would be a good time to drop them. Let's see, what is Jeffrey asking? This is exactly why I prefer rendering 3D projects as a sequence of JPEGs, audio and effects, and post editing. What about you? Yes, I do that. I render everything, not everything actually. If it's a long sequence, like really long, I'll do JPEG. But sometimes I do MP4 or even no, actually I do MOV. Um, Depending on what I'm going to do afterwards. Sometimes like this, if it's just a hammer hitting a nail, and I need to render it out to show you guys, I'll just render it out as an MP4 and upload it to YouTube. But if it's a project and it's something I know I'll have to work on later, yeah, that's when now we start talking about like EXR and such. Actually, I'll probably do EXR, not JPEG. If I do image sequence, I'll do EXR because you can do 32-bit, you can do multi-channel, and somehow it's going to be like about the same size. It'll be like just a bit bigger than a JPEG sequence, which is nice. I do similar. Why not PNG though? Better quality and an alpha or TIFF if you don't care about space. Yeah, TIFF files are huge, but I'd say try OpenEXR. It has a compression method that's usually off, but if you go into the zip settings, you can add compression that will make the files a bit smaller. I also like PNG. PNG also does PNG go up to 32? It does, and it has an alpha channel, which is really handy. Um, but yeah, if it's an image sequence, OpenEXR. Otherwise, I'll do MOV, which MOV also supports alpha. So that's, and it also can make a pretty small file, which is cool. All right, but that doesn't really have to do with computers creating frames, does it? In terms of rendering, it does, but not in the way we're talking of animating. So I'm just gonna give one more example. This is called basically the camera move. If you've worked in After Effects with the camera, you probably know why. This is why you create a camera and always have a null object pointed to it. So this is what you're gonna do. You're gonna put your 3D object in the middle of the scene, put your camera on one side, and you're like, gonna do a very nice camera move from one side to the other of this object. So you have your camera on one side. You're gonna create your keyframes. There's your stars for the keyframes. One on the left, one on the right. So obviously, what you expect to happen is, why did I put that text there so I can block it? Expectation. Your expectation is that it's basically going to swing around and do a nice camera move. I mean, you've eased it and everything. You've used Bezier keys, so it's probably gonna be cool. But what actually happens is computer is like, I got this, bro, and just straight up draws a straight line between the 2 points and just draws the camera along that line. And you can also see the rotation. It's not even facing the logo anymore. It's just slightly to the side, just because of the path it's taking. So again, computer is like, bro, I'm just filling in the gaps. I'm just doing that linear thing of Jazanaing, but it's not really. It doesn't know that you're trying to aim at the logo. It just knows it needs to fill the gap from one point to the other. And that's why I was saying a keyframe is more about a user defined value as opposed to an important storytelling point. A person can tell a storytelling point, but if it's just a user defined value, it's here and it goes here. So you just need to know that the comp is just going to do from one point to the other. So what does this mean for us, guys? It means we need to change our workflow. It means we can't just sit there and expect it to work just because of the UI or the workflow. And there's a very good reason, actually, why you'd make this mistake in After Effects. Should have opened it. Let's get it running in the background. There's a very good reason why you'd probably have this issue, which is that the way the camera tool works inside After Effects, you'll put the camera here, set a keyframe, and then the process you'll use to get the camera to the other side is with that rotate tool, which is basically going to make the camera move in an arc. So to you, it'll make sense. It'll be like, I mean, it did that in the camera itself. I don't see why suddenly it's just doing something completely different. So for me, that was now this lesson of the computer is just filling in the gaps. It's not thinking like you that you're trying to show this logo. So it's up to us now to change our workflow and change how we're thinking and try and get the arc that we're looking for. And the common solution for that would be to use the pen tool method. This is not the common solution. One method would be to use the pen tool, and it's basically like thinking about the path that the camera needs to take, thinking of it like drawing it with the pen tool. So instead of drawing a triangle like this, you can draw two extra points on the sides, and that's just going to make it maybe just curve just a little bit more. Not necessarily curving completely, but doing it that way. Hello, Mr. Horse. Doing it that way just gives it more space. It's less likely for the computer to now try and fill in this gap here. Or rather, as you know, the best way to get to a curve is just to add more points. If you want this to curve even more, you can just add an extra location here and pull it back here. Maybe add one more and pull it back here. And yeah, now the comp, when it fills in for you, it's going to fill them in a bit better. And the other one is now to go properly technical and tell the comp, okay, you know what, you want to do it your way? Alright, let's do this then. And now create a null object, parent your camera to that null object. Make sure the null object is in the middle of your scene, and then your null is what you're going to rotate to make the camera move. And now, again, the workflow is a bit counterintuitive. It's now we are putting the keyframes on the null object to animate the camera, which is pretty strange, pretty counterintuitive, but when you think about it this way, it makes sense. But you can still achieve the same effect with this sort of workflow. More keyframes. Here it's just two keyframes. So one of the pros I was saying earlier as well is that there's many ways to do the same thing. Just depends on how much you know and how far you're willing to go to achieve what you need. So eventually what happens now is the methods that we're going to use to achieve, the methods we're going to use to instruct the computer what we want are now what replaces the instructions that the bosses would give their assistants and such. So for us to be able to instruct the computer properly, we're going to do it by the method that we use to animate. You want your arms to look nice and smooth as they're moving around like this. Instead of yelling at the computer and asking it why it's so silly, maybe you shouldn't use IK. IK limbs are not meant to be used for stuff spinning around. Maybe it's on you to now change your method and now use FK, so that as the character's arm is rotating, even the computer itself knows what to do. So yeah, the method that you use to instruct is what you use to instruct the comp. So what does this mean? Even as you experience a problem or you're trying to figure out how to better get those frames in between, you're looking for another method. You're looking for a plugin. You're looking for maybe it's a script you don't know about, or maybe it's a button you don't know about. You're trying to figure out the method to explain to the comp. So yeah, remember guys, a keyframe is a user-defined value in time. It's just, I want this to be here at this time, and then the next frame you're saying, I want this to be here at this time. And the comp is just gonna change those values. It's not going to think about poses. It's not going to think about locations and such things. It's not going to think about readability or anything else. It's just going to interpolate between those values. So a helpful way to think about how you're working with keyframes, either in After Effects or 3D, is to think of them in pairs. Keyframes define change, or rather the space between keyframes define whether there is change or not. So you kind of want to be thinking about them in twos. So what's happening from this keyframe to this one? You're not really thinking about, well, you're thinking about what the values of these two are, but you're also kind of thinking, when you're looking at what's happening in between, when you move the time in the middle and you're seeing some weird stuff is going on, you're thinking about those two keyframes on either side. So you're always looking at them in twos. So it can also double up. not necessarily just these two are paired. There's also this gap in the middle. If nothing happens, that also counts. That between these two keyframes, nothing is happening. Um, so yeah, computer problems. We're redefining what keyframes are. It's changing how we're planning and executing our animations. It's giving us stuff like STS anxiety, which is stepped to spline anxiety, which is you watch your animation when it's stepped, you select all your keyframes, set them to spline, and when you watch it, you're like, oh my god, what am I doing with my life? It's really crazy how much worse it looks when you change those two. And if you talk to Walt Disney about how crazy it is to go from step to spline, he'd probably be like, "Ay, bruh, me, I don't even know what that is. Me, I'm stressed about trying to get these assistants to do things properly." So just equally, that's basically what's going to happen to us. The workflows we're looking at now are just going to be overshadowed by where tech and such things are going to take us. And yeah, we're also increasing technical requirements on the artists. You now have to start knowing what a null object is, and you have to know how to parent it properly. And you also have to know that now you have to put the keyframes on the null instead of the camera. Like there's now these technical things you have to start to learn in order to work with a computer. But generally speaking, we still have to remember that there are pros. There were pros to it. Computers still they just need information. They're not stupid. They just need more information to be able to do what you want them to do. And sometimes all that is just that one keyframe. You don't have to go in and start changing all sorts of things. Maybe you just need that one keyframe to tell it to keep the nail up until the hammer is touching it. Hammer. To keep the nail up until the hammer is touching it. You just need to add that one keyframe, and then the computer is now doing everything else properly. So even just being able to know that that's what you need to do is considered technical requirements. So as you're working with a comp, don't be afraid to delete stuff. If it's not working, just delete and put something else. Most of the times, the long way is the best way to do it, and sometimes starting over from scratch is better than struggling to fix it. You made a mistake, just start again, as opposed to trying to look for plugins or some sneaky way to fix what you've done. So I think the big takeaway here is make sure you're evolving with the art. Keep track of what's happening with motion tracking. Try and learn the tools as best as you can to improve. And make sure as things are changing, you also have a gist. I mean, this doesn't mean now we all just start doing mocap, but at least know what mocap is about, know what it's bringing to the table, know the difference in workflow and technique that it also brings. A funny story I hear and that I'll always tell. Some guys always, or rather, I always get randomly asked, "What do you think now? Mocap is here. Is it going to change? Are people going to lose their jobs?" And I don't think so. If anything, the guys running mocap used to be animators, and one of the things people don't realize is Uncharted. When Uncharted 3 was being developed, they decided to move to full on mocap for the cinematics. But then they realized that now that the characters themselves are acting so realistically and it all looks so super real, what about the scenes that we can't mock up? The scenes where they're like falling off buildings and jumping off airplanes, and okay, they probably can't mock up that stuff. But all these scenes in between that they can't mock up, they had to they actually had to take their animators to like workshops and schools to upgrade their skills, so that if you watched the mocap stuff, you couldn't tell the difference between the mocap and the stuff they themselves animated by hand. And so yeah, they were forced to improve their own animation skills just because mocap was introduced to the system. So yeah, as much as mocap is coming, it also comes with its problems, and just remember the shots that are not mocapped have to look just as good as the mocapped shots, and that's just nuts to me. So yeah, make sure you're always evolving. Make sure you know what's going on. Now that you know that is what mocap is bringing to the table, make sure that you're also, as your skills are also improving, you can now start seeing how it's plugging in. For some people, even mocap, or actually for the longest time, mocap was used as reference. you just have a mocap rig that runs and does the whole animation. But then now an animator comes in and hand animates it to match the mocap, so that they can add exaggeration, they can add those arcs of how the arm should move perfectly and such things. So yeah. Uh, I think mocap is not that great, guys. It's cool, but it's not the solution. The solution be that's going to end all our problems. So yeah, make sure you're always evolving with the art, and yeah, and you'll be good. Oh wow, exactly 1 hour. Boop on the dot. It's 9 o'clock. So yeah, thank you guys for checking out the presentation. If you guys have any more questions, hope that made sense. Especially for guys who are starting out or new to this, or even you guys who have been doing this for a long time. I hope that's all made sense and it's something new to you. In the meantime, if you guys have any other questions, you can drop them right now, or any comments. Let's see. All right. Let me show you this real quick. Once per session. Let's see. All right. Let's act like I did that before the presentation. Awesome, bro. Great insight. Awesome. I'm glad you guys. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. Give a like and subscribe. It's YouTube. Give a like and subscribe. To check out more. I'll be doing more next week. Still, I will be back with something else. So I'm gonna do a couple of demos just to reiterate the stuff I've mentioned about how we can talk to the comp better. They'll be pretty quick, maybe like 10 or so minutes. So let's just bear with it for a sec, and we can be done. So I want to quickly show that mistake that will happen to you in After Effects if it's your first time using it, or or just generally speaking. If I want to show how the UI can sometimes confuse you. So I have a camera here, and oops, let me hide myself for a sec. So I've created a new camera, and I just have the text here, camera, to confuse us even further of which layer is which. And then I've just added a null object to use later. So what happens with After Effects is, if you're in the active camera mode and you fly around like this with the camera tool, as you can see, it's rotating around the object. And another way I can show you to properly see this is to change this to 2 views. And now you can kind of see the camera down here. And as I move around, you can see it's spinning around a specific point, right? So I'm going to just go and put the camera here like this. Go to position, set a keyframe, go down to 4 seconds, and then I'll do this. I'll go like this. And I'll be like, ah, damn, I really hope it rotates that way. Now, if you also take a look at this line here, as I'm doing that, let me just do that again real quick, and you'll see how as the line is drawing, it kind of turns as well. So it's going down and to the left, and then it starts going up, and now it's just to the left the more I turn. So now it's just drawing a straight line like that. But to me, who's using the UI here, who's just using the UI here and the camera tool, I don't know that there's just more stuff going on. So, I should have done rotation as well. No, I don't need rotation because it's a 2-point camera. So now when we come back and watch the animation, you'll be like, wait, why is it now suddenly going close up and then zooming out again? That's not what I wanted. And now that's back to what I was saying. You now have to help the comp to know that you don't just want it to go from point A to point B, you also need some distance. And the only way to tell it that is just to give it more information and tell it to do that. And then now it's doing something else. Oh man, this camera is really crazy. But if you guys want to know why it does that, if you go to layer camera settings, there's this type. You can choose 1 node camera. It's usually set to 2 node camera, but if you set it to 1 node camera, it stops using that one point as where the camera is looking. It removes that point of interest thing. Apparently this setting has been there since like I don't know, CS5 or something, but it's always defaulted to 2 node camera. And I mean, who even changes these settings? The most I'd ever do is change the preset. So I've never really seen this, but yeah, that sucks. So to fix that, I'll just grab this guy, transform, reset, and this time now the common solution is you grab the camera, parent it to a null object, and then now on the null we can do the rotation. So now I've lost something here. I can't interact with the camera anymore in the UI, so I'm forced to now use this setting here, which kind of sucks. And I also can't see the path anymore here, so I kind of have to rely on I just have to count on this thing working the way I know it will, just because of how I've set it up. But very little of it has to do with most of it is just how I'm informing the comp. So personally, I don't really like that workflow. I don't like using a null. I usually just, maybe because I'm feeling I regret all the time I've wasted using a 2-point camera, but just setting it to that kind of helps. It removes that point of interest thing. So that's the camera inside After Effects. That's number 1. Number 2, before we see too many things, here is the hammer scene inside Blender. So we'll just do the same thing I did before. I'll start at frame 1. I'll grab the nail. Oh no, actually let me do it the way I know I'd do it. So I'd select the hammer, press I, go location and rotation, and then go to frame, let's say 19, and just move this down here, rotate it like this. Right, we hit I, available, and then I'll grab the nail and bend it. So I need to create that first keyframe, otherwise it's going to stay bent. So I'll go back here, set the insert keyframe, and then go down to 19, right? Yes, and bend it. There we go. And then keyframe. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, I've set my 2 keyframes. I have the hammer up there, and then it comes down and hits. So obviously, once you play it through, the nail is going to start bending earlier, and that's not quite ideal. So what I actually need to do is grab the nail, grab its key, and we can just find the point where I want it to start bending actually, and then just move the keyframe there. And then now it'll do what I want. And now you can see all these, just by making that change, by moving, oops. So right now what we've established is all these frames are wrong. All these frames up to this point, all these frames were wrong. But by moving this keyframe here, we've essentially saved, okay, not really saved, but we've now made all these frames from 16 backwards. All these frames are now correct. And we fixed all those just by adding this one keyframe here. It sounds pretty obvious, but when it comes to now animating like a walk and like a full-on big character doing all sorts of things and all the controls moving at the same time, doing something like this becomes a bit more relevant. It looked like the nail was dodging the hammer. It did. It's like now I'm starting to tell a whole other story. It's becoming Matrix. But no, my plan was just to show this. So the same thing happens. You'll be animating a walk, which I wish I could do right now, but no. It's gonna be way too long. But let's go back to picture in picture. Yeah, so animating a walk is the same thing. You'll do contact, you'll do down, you'll do all those fancy poses, but then you'll find in between the comp is just doing all sorts of crazy things. It's the arm is maybe not spinning quite right, or the overlap on the wrist is not doing it quite right. And you'll find the best way to fix the issue is not to fix that one frame you're seeing with a mistake. It's to go to the either the keyframe before or the keyframe after, or maybe to even add a keyframe before or after the point you're looking at. But yeah, it's just to keep your mind open. So one last thing I'd say is you kind of noticed as I was creating this that it's here. You kind of noticed as I was creating this and as I was putting the keyframes for the nail that it was kind of obvious I was gonna make that mistake. If we now that we're looking at it with hindsight, let me clear the keyframes. Why would I do add keying set? Okay, so you can kind of tell that I did the hammer. So I kind of should have realized when I was saying it that instead of going all the way back to frame 0 to put the keyframe, that was the point for me to realize I should have actually just put that keyframe here to begin with. And then now bend it here like this. And now that's now coming to realize that because it's just doing values, I don't, just because I want this frame here of the nail up and the hammer up, it doesn't necessarily mean that this keyframe for the nail being up has to be here. It's crazy. I mean, it doesn't have, I mean, the nail being up doesn't have to be on frame 0. It can be on a frame that's way down. So we don't necessarily have to put all the keyframes together. This one, its keyframes are on 1 and 19. This one, its keyframes are on 16 and 19. You're doing a walk, you'll have your arms, your keyframes are doing one thing, your head, the keyframes are doing something else, and so on. And all this is not just to make more spaghetti, but just to help the comp make better frames in between. Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Thank you once again for coming through for the weekly stream. If you guys have any questions or anything you'd like to ask or any observations you have concerning animation and the stuff I've talked about, feel free to drop a comment in chat. Yeah, but otherwise, thanks for watching, and thanks for making it through to the end. Woo. Oh, I tried to do a walk while you guys are doing questions. Nah. Why do I want to do a walk so badly? I had hoped I could have done a walk, but takes too much time. Walks are like the hardest thing to do because you have to add so many keys, way more keys than you'd really want to achieve the same effect. Let's see. Awesome. Thanks for coming through, guys. It's really good to hear that it's helpful. And it's not just me saying obvious things. Let's see. Yeah, I think I could just do like a walk animation on its own. I'd rather do that as its own like hangout. Then you have like a full hour to work on it. Then I can do some cool stuff. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Jotham, for coming through. Thanks for coming through for them for almost all the hangouts now. Yeah. Thanks so much, dude. I had a rig somewhere. It's a bad one. Corey. Okay. Yeah. I think it would be fair, like, I think it can be its own hangout because you can learn some really cool things, especially if it's from people who've watched this one and then we're going into the next one knowing the stuff we've gone through. It can be cool. Yeah, it can be a really cool demo, I think. So thanks, Atella. Is it Atella? Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for watching. There's more to come. I'll either do a ball animation or a walk next. Yeah, but same thing, same time next week. Just come through, catch on YouTube. Same thing as always. You can catch me in the group on Telegram, where you can leave questions in advance, or you can suggest things I can do next, or we can discuss. Guys have been posting their work and getting feedback. There was animations posted. There's some stills posted. Really cool stuff. So keep it up, guys. Thanks so much. Once again, thanks for coming for the stream. Thanks for watching it after the fact, even all the way to the end where I'm rambling. Really, really thankful for all the time you guys are spending with me here. So yeah, that's it. Catch you guys in the group, and video people, I'll catch you here again next week. So what's up? Thank you. Someone needs to answer me though. If you beatbox something, can you accidentally beatbox something and it gets copyright striked? Share someone. Like just content ID, at least picking up on it. Not necessarily that you get in trouble. But yeah. Anyway. Cheers, guys. Not in the same key. Oh, I have a nice voice. I do. I have a very unique voice. So yeah, they probably wouldn't be able to. That's a good point. I just want this to get taken down. Nah, man. I don't want no trouble. Anyway, mic is still hot. Cheers, guys.